Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Mental Health and Society, a program brought to you by the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists. So, my name is JL Valdez, and I am the Public Relations Officer, and I will be your host today. So, it is October, and a lot of us are commemorating mental health as we would have commemorated World Mental Health Day on the 10th of October. So, in our efforts to raise mental health awareness, we will be speaking today with some very special and knowledgeable folks on different populations within society and how they're affected by mental health. So, it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Kelly McFarlane, who is a clinical and organizational psychologist and former TTAP PRO, and she will be speaking today. Well, I'll let her tell you that in a little bit. Ronald Auguste, Mr. Ronald Auguste, who is a counseling psychologist, is with us today as well. Mr. Luke Sinette, a lead social worker, and Mr. Bertrand Moses, who is a psychotherapist. Okay, so these are by no means the extensive backgrounds and descriptions of what they do, but today we're going to talk with them a little bit about mental health and society. So thank you all for being here today. And when it comes to mental health, what aspect do you all find most common within the population which you serve?
I find that LGBT persons, because of how homophobia works in society and how sometimes it comes from your own family, the people who love you, hug you, give you money to go to school are the same people who might smack you on your hand for holding it funny or tell you something inappropriate or say inappropriate things without even knowing that you're gay. And kind of living through that weird duality. Persons, when they get into adulthood after this kind of long childhood kind of endurance trauma experience, they display symptoms of complex trauma. And so you find that they have an inability to kind of regulate emotions. So they fall in love very, very quickly, or they somebody's telling them, "Oh, I love you," and they're saying, "Nah, you're just trying to hurt me." And so you have these kind of strange dualities. And I know I'm not in the mental health profession, but when I, from a lay person's view, it looks very much like bipolar disorder. Because sometimes the emotions are so extreme. And so that was one of the things that I noticed, and I began to ask myself questions over and over. Is this something for therapy, or is this something for medication?
Yes, thank you, Luke. That is something I feel like a lot of us may not consider when looking at some of these behaviors that we see. So that is definitely something, to observe. And Kelly, what about you?
Well, in line a bit with what Luke said, and definitely with what Bertrand said for the last question, I would say the impact of your upbringing. Now, we know if any of us, subscribe to psychoanalysis and Freud and his type of psychology, we know that there is a major influence in the formative years. But I think with couples and the challenges they face in their marriage, a lot of it has to do with what they've experienced, their attachment, what they know relationships to be. And I always explain to people, whatever is unresolved in your family, you either marry it, become it, or work with it. So we got to get in there and clean up some stuff, to have healthy relationships and be aware of the things that drive the way that we interact with others.
Yeah, Kelly, that's something I'm going to take. What is it? You become it, you marry it, or you work with it?
Work with it.
Yeah, for sure.
If it's unresolved. Yeah.
If it's
you got to take control of it, or it will take control of you.
That's correct. Yes, good job. Was that everyone? Ronald? No, Ronald, yes.
So the most common aspect of mental health challenges in the population that I typically work with. Yeah, okay. So what I've found, I guess, with law enforcement in particular, but culturally, is how much we value suffering in silence. You know, there's almost a mark of strength to portray that you're not being fazed by anything at all, and seeing the fallout of that. You know, so you might see it in the different disorders, the psychosis, extreme ends, depression, anxiety, all those kind of things, but also in the health issues that tend to arise. I've seen a good few people with heart complications, kidney issues, all those kind of things, and not in full, but in part attached to this years and years and years of nothing bothers me. Hey, how you going? I good. kind of the instinctive response that we have as Trinidadians. And in law enforcement, it's almost like a magnified or a heightened version of that. They need to maintain this kind of everything is all right with me all the time persona. I'm the rock, and none of the environmental issues or anything like that actually bothering me. It might be bothering you, and I could be present to help you for what you're going through, but just know that this is not bothering me in the slightest. Right? That's that, and the many ways that it would show across situation, across age, across specific person, that kind of thing. It would vary, but that's the main thing that I've been seeing over the years in the profession.
Thanks so much, Ronald. Suffering in silence. I like that. And I think as you said before, that's a Trinidadian thing. That's a cultural thing. Well, a Trinbagodian thing, because we really don't deal with it. You know, we really don't deal with a lot of our issues. So yeah. And next up, is it Bertrand?
Yes, certainly. So I really want to, I love the flow, because Kelly and Ronald were just touching on something I really wanted to talk about. And for me, I love that in this conversation, and for people who are listening, you know, they may expect us to talk about depression or anxiety, but in reality, though, I love that we're looking at it based on what's the root behavior, what's underneath what you see diagnosed from the DSM. And so for me, the real issue I'm seeing really has to do with attachment styles. And if someone is listening, I do not familiar with it, there are 4 types of attachment styles. There's secure, anxious, preoccupied, dismissive, avoidant, and of course, fearful, avoidant. And I know based on the research and based on my experience working with the population, men and women tend to fall into different types. Of course, it varies from person to person, but quite often I see males with a sort of avoidant type of personality, attachment style. So, of course, when it comes to dealing with situations in relationships, they're avoidant. You know, you drink, you don't want to deal with it, yes. And now I can't sit down and talk with she right now. She has already talk off my head, you know. And when it comes to just dealing with issues at the workplace or confronting emotions when something happens, it's like, nah, but I talk thing, nah, it's not for me. And it shows up in so many ways. And so I think that's one of the common things. And it's clear because men don't often show up for therapy across the board when we do research across cultural settings. And so for me, the attachment styles of, you know, being avoidant or, you know, and whatever is happening with people, I see that in terms of how people show up in therapy and show up for counseling as well.
Thanks a lot for that, Bertrand. I mean, attachment styles, that is, I think, something that a lot of us don't go deep into in terms of therapy and when we're seeing our clients. So I think that is definitely something to kind of put more to the forefront of our minds as well, in terms of what do we see when we're dealing specifically with anyone, but specifically with men. So within your populations, and as I have you here, Bertrand, maybe you could start. Have you noticed any changes within your, you know, the male population within the recent years in terms of mental health, and even more specifically with regards to the pandemic?
Excellent question, and it's a serious thing. Again, piggybacking on what I said before, a lot of men aren't showing up for therapy. It's a population that doesn't often come forward. But what we do know, we just, you know, really punctuated it, Suicide Awareness Month, and we know the statistics. So we know between January and August in Trinidad and Tobago, of the 74 suicides that happened nationally, we know the number, 59 of them were men, and that's a huge percentage. And it's not just about the males with suicide, but it also has to do with the types of homicides, you know, the murder suicides that we also saw. And so for me, what I find is that men within the pandemic, they're losing a lot of the aspects related to masculinity. So you're losing your job, you're having a pay cut, so there's some dynamics there, but then you're unable to provide. Now you're at home, so you can't go to the bar and line with your boys and thing. And you have to face issues with children. A lot of fathers who haven't been at home are now with children, also with their wives, and there's limited options in terms of going out. And so what we find is that a lot of family systems are disrupted. Of course, we know that there has been global increases in domestic violence, in particular in the Caribbean and Latin America. But in Trinidad and Tobago, we know that our domestic violence registry did really reveal that there were increases in reports of domestic violence. And so for me, the one thing I look at is, of course, men and emotions. I haven't seen increases in terms of, so there's suicide, but there's also depression. But of course, men don't often show up in depression the way we think. So I would say that the suicide parts and the low affect of mood and sadness and not being able to translate that are some of the things that I would see based on the clients I've been working with currently. Honestly, a great increase in suicide ideation with my clients.
Wow, that is really hard to hear, but thank you, because it means that we have to be more aware and that there's a lot of work to be done. Luke, how about you and your population? What changes have you observed, and has there been anything going on in terms of the pandemic?
I've seen some changes over the years. So I joined Friends for Life when I was 19. And so that's like just about over 20 years ago for me. And back then, you realize people all their trauma a lot. But I mean, this is kind of how I think people in Trinidad dealt with trauma anyhow. So you grew up with maybe a father that was a bit too harsh on you because you were gay. Later on in your life, you meet somebody almost just like your father. I mean, the other, of course, I can't. You marry it. Well, I can't remember the other three, but
Marry, become, work
you
with.
meet somebody who's like, that is it. And then you form a relationship with them. But what you end up doing is it's their trauma meets up with your trauma, and you end up having this tumultuous relationship, but you wear it and you begin to think about it as something that is life. So no, it's supposed to go like this. I have an old friend who always says the gay life is a lonely life. And he meant that because it doesn't matter how much partners you have, someday they're going to leave and you're going to end up being an old, lonely gay person. But then you wear that, But after all these years of LGBT visibility, the internet, cable, you find that young people are more willing to challenge those things. And so that's what I'm glad about. People are more willing to come to therapy and they're more willing to challenge those things. COVID has been very odd. It's because you're confined to your home. For many, many LGBT persons, being out of the home is so important, especially when you live with family. You don't want to take on the stress. You don't want to be slight comments. You don't want, when you're bringing a girl home, all those things that you kind of put up with just regularly because you have several outlets. Those things are kind of taken away, and you find that there's some more hostility in the home. You find that domestic violence also has increased. And domestic violence in both counts, so it's with partners as well as with family. And we did a survey 3 years ago, and we found that 69% of the persons who answered the survey, domestic violence also comes from their family. And so it just kind of opens your eye now. Like, if you don't really think about it, we don't even talk about it that much. But there's a lot of homophobia that exists within the family context that people are trying to get over. Substance use, I see, has also gone up. So I don't know, but everybody is smoking marijuana now. That's just kind of how it is. Like, every client, I have to ask the question, how frequently? How many times a month? How many times a week? How many times a day? Because people are self-medicating at home, and so substance use kind of goes up. The other thing that I've noticed is just intense loneliness. LGBT persons, they describe a certain kind of, I don't know, because you have friends on work, you have your family, you have friends, but they're still alone somehow in the middle of all of that. And I can't really get at it, but it's more of not being able to find themselves. And so the intense pressure that comes from just being by yourself all the time, I think drives people to do really crazy things. And so if you go online, sometimes I wonder, because if people like just kind of go on Facebook and they say, you know, Indian bottom from Tuna Puna, is anybody, you know, that kind of, is anybody out there? That kind of intense desire for connection that can be very problematic and lead to diseases. I mean, it's a lot of problems that it can create. And those are the things that we're trying to now figure out and ameliorate during the COVID.
Wow, I think that was definitely an eye-opener for me. But it's amazing because you are getting the information and now you're trying to see what you can do with it. And I think a lot of us as psychotherapists, we're trying to get that as well. You know, how do we treat with these problems that we're seeing? Things that people may have been dealing with already, but then COVID just kind of explodes everything, you know? Thanks for that, Luke. Kelly?
Let me see. I think I would say since COVID, I did notice more referrals from medical doctors, which to me, well, for one, people are having more somatic symptoms. So, you know, the stress and the anxiety will cause some sleep issues, some pains and things like that. So what's happening is that also we have a Lyman culture, you know, we go and we hang out by the bar and whatever, or we eat at the restaurant, or we hang out with friends a lot more. And now we've lost that to a great extent. And so people are now more sort of forced to recognize when they're not self-medicating that something has to be done. And so with both adults and couples, those sorts of things are driving them more to do something. I know I always say that I get couples when they've filed divorce papers or they're on the brink of the end, and then I get them, you know, and then I'm always like, what happened? You know, why didn't you come in 5 years ago when that thing happened, you know? And I'm getting them a little earlier now because now you're spending a little too much time together, and you know, so things like that are kind of pushing people to get up and get things done in terms of their mental health and their well-being a lot faster, which is a good thing. You know.
It is definitely a good thing. And, you know, so it's a good thing and a bad thing because, as you said, you know, they're spending so much time with each other now. So they're like, some of them are at each other's throats. But also it's good because now you're here before you file for divorce.
It gets too bad.
Yeah, so that's
sweep things
that's
under
good.
the rug. Yeah.
But that's what we do, huh? That's what we do. We don't acknowledge things, you know, up front and face on. So thanks, Kelly.
Sure.
Ronald, what have you seen?
Okay, well, a little known fact in the wider population, right? The police service in particular is increasing its focus on mental health. All right. So in the first instance, it's actually a policy within the service that anytime a police officer is involved, for example, in a shooting incident, right, they as a group have to go through a psychological debriefing, right? Using that as one means of interfacing with mental health professionals, it slowly but surely began to transform what people see mental health and mental health services as. So actually, over the years, I saw an increase in the number of people. It would not be publicized actually, but I've seen more and more officers be to the idea, to the concept of if I'll go by the doctor, so this is not that far off. It's the same kind of parallel. you know, to embrace wellness on a more holistic level.
Thanks, and it's so good to hear that. I mean, coming from a law enforcement family myself, it's nice to know that the perspective is changing with regards to mental health and, you know, police officers, and the fact that they're encouraging them to access it on a wider scale. I think that's really good news for us. And so maybe you can tell us, and that's such an interesting population, what is probably the biggest misconception in mental health in terms of treating with that particular population?
The biggest misconception that I think the general public has about police officers, kind of similar to, you know, when you're in primary school and Miss and Sir is only Miss or Sir is not a person, a full human being who just happens to be a teacher. Similar kind of fashion, I guess we all maintain some kind of person with a cape on, and they're supposed to be the best officer, they're supposed to be the best fireman, they're supposed to be the best counselor, they're supposed to be the best wordsmith, all those kind of things. We expect a level of perfection that might be unrealistic. So I would say the biggest misconception is that police officers, law enforcement professionals, are actually human beings that just have one component of their life attached to this particular thing. It's not that they're this character, this persona that is always this thing. You know what? A good example of that is if the child of a police officer is less than perfect, some of the comments you tend to hear, but how much is our police though? How come she's late for school? How come she gets suspended? Those kind of things, and the pressures for you to maintain this persona, and for everybody who is now seen as an extension of you to maintain this persona, that in itself creates some challenges, right? But as I said, the main misconception is the fact that police officers are human beings too.
Police are people too. Okay. All right. Thank you. Maybe Bertrand could tell us about the males and what is the biggest misconception in terms of treating with them.
Well, I have to answer that question by being personal and give an anecdote. So I remember, I think the biggest misconception to me is that men cannot talk about their feelings and emotions. Cannot, as in men don't talk about those things, right? So I recall when I was doing my master's, I was in the US. So I work a lot with young people, so you'll forgive me if I dramatize a situation. So, because that's how, you know, you have to keep them with you. So I remember I was in my program, and when I arrived, I had done psychology undergrad, I was doing the master's in psychotherapy and stuff. And I remember in the class, you know, the lecturer, they put us in small groups to talk about things before we started to get into classes, because you have to go to therapy yourself and all that. And he said, Bertrand, so tell me, how do you feel about that? And I said, I feel good, miss. Yeah, I feel good, Dr. Weber. And she said, well, go a little deeper with me, Bertrand. You can share more. And I remember I was struggling to really dig into myself to find ways to express more of how I felt and my emotions. And I think from that first quarter, I really struggled. And I recognized that as a Caribbean male, there were lots of ways that I was socialized where I was not encouraged to share my feelings and emotions. And it's not a thing that is, it's not about pathology, it's not about men are doing it on purpose, it is a socialization factor. It runs so deep in our entertainment, in Lyman on the Block, in how we see our fathers, and childhood, boys will cry, we're crying for, and it's reinforced. So for me, then I had to really work on that. And so I think what I noticed is that a lot of the males in my group, there were only 3 in the cohort, they were able to grow over the period, regardless there was an Asian male or Caucasian male, they would, you know, and so it's something that we could beat regardless of the culture you come from. But what I've found though in recent time in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of a misconception is that young people and men can't talk about their emotions, and there are 2 real life situations that I could share. One is the Empower TT program, which is a program done by the Ministry of Youth Affairs. And of course, it was focused on men coming together in male zones, M zones, they call them, male-friendly spaces, and talking about emotions. And it would always be young men with, say, 5 males of my age talking with them. And the young men would open up and talk about everything from the pain they experience with their fathers not being there, talking about abuse, mental health issues, and we'd have a psychologist talk to them. And young men would always open up. But I think the thing that was different is that they were in a setting where we as males, older men, were talking about our emotions or feelings, what we've been through, and then they felt comfortable. So that was an example of modeling in terms of reshaping the way that young men can talk about their feelings and emotions. And the second one is Los Gens TT. I always have to big them up because I feel like Los Gens TT should be on TV6 and they should have a program nationally because they talk about substance abuse, they talk about body shaming, and they share real examples from their heart. And I tell them I appreciate that because I have never seen it happen as a young man growing up. I never saw males talking like that about feelings, about divorce, about breakups, about substance abuse, about body issues. Never. But it's something that we all go through. And so I'd say the misconception is that men cannot talk about it. Men can, but we need to create the environments and context and safe spaces where men can share. So that's what I would say in regards to that.
Thank you for that, Bertrand. And I think that is definitely something for us to hold on to, the fact that that is changing, so that males can share their feelings, although now I think you may have put some of them in a little bit of trouble because now it will be that they choose.
No. So let me say this. So let me say this. So for all the men who are listening right now and the wife say, oh, you can't talk, I can deal with you. If you're hearing that, go onto Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube and type in Los Gens TT and just look through episodes. And they are now a platform on Digicel. This is no plug. It's free.
It's a big
and they're on
plug.
a Digicel platform as well. So, there's a Digicel platform as well. So you could see episodes on Digicel throughout the region also.
Thanks. Yes, Bertrand Los Gens is doing amazing work and we applaud them. And, thank you so much, you and Empower, for creating spaces for males to feel free. So hopefully that will start the revolution. Yeah? Luke, how about you?
Well, one of the biggest misconceptions is that if you are doing couples therapy, then LGBT couples therapy is the same. Or if you had sexual abuse as a child, that for the gay person, the recovery or the treatment plan is the same. And it actually sometimes it's just in nuance most of the times. If you one very, very simple example, in that in the LGBT community, one of the huge or the biggest kind of tenets is that we say mean, snide things to each other, but it's all part of the culture and it's all part of how we engage. It comes one who are homophobic towards you and cruel, and so you kind of then internalize that and do that yourself. On the other hand, it's almost like little ones, and you really kind of home in their witty comments and their snide remarks, and then as they get older, they're able to deal with the world better. So somebody on the block says to you, "Hey, you're faggot," and then you say, "Yes," but it's a way that we've kind of internalized this ponging, might I say. Now, what happens is that when you get to therapy, LGBT, and so you find that they're very explicit and very harsh. They have no bones or no qualms talking about sex or sexual parts, and they have no qualms about saying cruel or mean things to you or about themselves. And if you don't understand it and know that, it means that sometimes you engage in therapy and somebody says something that sounds very, very horrible, but really it's the more heartless, what's the word I'm looking for? When it's not mean. Yeah, it's just not mean. And so if you're able to kind of appreciate and understand all of the nuances that comes in the culture, you're able to engage better and not sometimes go down a wrong path looking for something that's not there.
Thanks so much, Luke, because what I'm hearing there is that when seeing members of this population, it's really important to, number one, not assume their experience is cookie cutter like everyone else's, and also to be sure to ask, okay, so I'm aware that in a heterosexual relationship or with a heterosexual person, this may occur. How has it been different for you? Something like that. Yeah, that works?
Yeah, that really does work. I mean, sometimes gay couples try and imitate heteronormativity, And well, for one, it works because we've kind of been fed that socially so much that in order for us to fit into a world, we have to create the mold to fit into the space. And then sometimes you have LGBT couples that really challenge those notions. And then that also comes from the pain and wanting to get away from it. And it's like, really and truly, why is masculinity so very prescribed or so very boxed in? And why is femininity so very soft? And so just challenge those notions and ask yourself. So in gay relationships, the female might be the female, and I'm using that in inverted commas. I really hope you kind of see the ridiculousness of kind of what I'm saying. And or in male relationships, the bottom might be the female again. And you even hear it in the ways that they talk about it, or all these kind of gendered ways that they've learned about the world. So that I'm trying to get a good phrase, but essentially, you're a woman, you know it. Men have a way that they kind of speak to women in an expectation that that you know that your gender is the fear of the sex. And you find those things happening as well in LGBT relationships. But the cute thing is that you have these incredible pockets where people completely challenge those. And those things really help me. Because because I also work in National Family Services. And so I do family therapy and individual therapy as well. And when you get into those spaces and you see that when it comes down to each individual person coming in for a session, and how just being able to know all of the nuances about gender and to be able to interact with that person better, and also to get that person to feel comfortable that expressing parts of themselves that they may not they may not see as aligned to their gender is okay. And so you could wear your hair short and you don't have to feel bad about it. Or, well, that's a cool example, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Luke. And Kelly, how about you? What are the misconceptions with the couples?
The misconceptions that couples have about coming to therapy. I think in general, a big misconception is that my problems could be fixed in a day. I mean, I see a doctor, and the doctor gives me medication, and it solves my problem. So if I go to the psychologist, we sit down for the session, and we should be great after. But it takes years to develop a dynamic and to develop, some of the issues that people end up going to therapy for. And sometimes those years aren't just in the relationship and just in the marriage. Sometimes, again, it's from childhood. So, this kind of, and even if it doesn't take a day or one and done, for some people it takes longer. So when someone is anxious, how many sessions do I need? What do I need to do? Well, we have there's a process that we do have to go through to figure out, what is underlying all of this, and that things aren't just what you see on the surface. He just needs to learn how to speak better. She needs to stop drinking. Okay, but why is she drinking? Where, what else is there? So, and that's the thing about therapy. I remember I was out somewhere one time and somebody said, it was at a bar, and somebody said, you see this? This is therapy. Lying at the bar. And I was flabbergasted. It's like, people think this is therapy. I mean, people say those things, and they have no idea. Again, back to what I said earlier on, people really don't quite understand what psychotherapy is, So.
That is very true. And I'm glad that you're on that vein of thought, because I also want to ask you, what aspect of mental health do you think is not spoken about enough when it comes to your population?
Yeah. For couples, I guess for a long time, and Bertrand did touch on this, it was how men feel and in relationships. So I remember I was talking to a couple recently too, and the man said something about his feelings, and the person, his partner turned around and said, "You have feelings, you know, you don't study." You know, so sometimes we don't realize that men do have an emotional side, and sometimes men play into that. So because a man might think that a woman has an idea of what a man's supposed to behave like, look like, talk like, feel, do not feel, they aren't their true self, and that just ends up spiraling into a whole different bunch of problems in the relationship, where he doesn't feel heard or understood but isn't saying anything. So I think that's one thing that's oftentimes not spoken about a lot when a man tries to talk about what he's feeling, and it's not really necessarily taken as seriously as it should be. And I think too, again, breaking generational toxicity, I kind of just came up with that phrase, but just just understanding that, yes, you know, some of the things that I do and I feel and the ways that I think are from generations, are just like my parents, and I married someone who's like one of my parents, and usually it's the parent that triggered me the most. So now that pattern is, if I used to avoid this parent because they triggered me the most, now I'm avoiding you, and I'm not even realizing that I'm replaying that pattern. And what it is that I actually want to connect with that parent, and I see it in you, and I feel like maybe I can conquer that relationship here, but yet I'm not changing my approach. So you know how psychology is. So there's a lot to really consider, you know.
That is spot on. I don't even have anything else to say. Yeah, that is spot on. We tend to go for that person who triggers us the most, and we hope if we could conquer it here, we'll feel good and everything will fall together. But it doesn't work like that. So thank you. What about you, Bertrand?
I would say,
spoken about the most.
yeah, I mean, to be honest, I remember 6 years ago, I returned to Trinidad. I was working as a therapist with the National Family Services and also with the Youth Development Centers on the Ministry of Youth. And I remember going across the nation from Couva to, from Arima to Couva to Point Fortin, Port of Spain. I was at EP that I was just determined to, I just, everything is for me, you know. And I remember being assigned all over. And I remember something really stood out to me, and that issue is the trauma and abuse of boys. I think that is something that we have to punctuate. There are males, young boys who are being sexually abused, but it never really makes the reports, you know. We know that the data from the Children's Authority really reflects that there are a lot of abuse, sexual forms of abuse reported against girls, but there are low reports about boys. What we see for boys in the data from the Children's Authority is that there are more reports on physical abuse, but it doesn't change the fact that boys are being abused sexually. And so then what we have is trauma. So we have boys who are traumatized and they live with it in secret because, again, with males, it's the stigma. You would never report that you're being sexually abused if you're a male because there will be so many labels put onto you, and that's reinforced in society. And so our boys grew up with that. So I think as that continues, it means that we don't look at men and trauma in terms of men really are challenged by that. And it's things that they're locking up inside and hiding their abuse. And I saw that working with young people across the nation. Quite often when there's a young man with, most of our young men who end up in our children's homes would have some history of sexual abuse or physical abuse, but it's not spoken about. And I know the call therefore out of this, you know, is really that people who are listening to just report, you know, report when our boys are being sexually abused, physically abused, all the types of abuse, so that we could start to address these with males as well. So that as they grow up and they go older, it could address some of the side effects that come from trauma that show up in the therapy room in different ways as well.
Thank you so much. That is definitely a topic that a lot of people don't like to touch with the 10-foot pole, but it is absolutely necessary for us to speak on it. So thank you. Ronald, what do we not talk about enough in mental health with law enforcement?
Okay, I would say seeing it as part of a holistic picture. All right, it's very easy to see addressing mental health concerns as taken away from what I could be doing otherwise. So you might hear things like, I didn't go on vacation in 10 years. I don't have any sick leave in 15 years. Those kind of things as a badge of honor, because the initial impulse or the instinct is to see addressing your mental health, prioritizing your mental health, admitting that there are mental health challenges that you face as being something that pulls in the opposite direction from your effectiveness, from your professionalism, all those kind of things, right? So the reconceptualizing of mental health as one of the key components, if not the key component to you being effective and efficient in all the elements of your life, in particular your work life, over an extended period of time. So from seeing it as a weakness, seeing it as something that needs to be addressed in order for me to be the best version of X that I need to be, that I want to be, that I aim to be.
Thank you for that, Ronald. I agree. It needs to be the key component. But I think, as you know, we are working on building mental health awareness. Hopefully that will continue to change and improve with time. Luke, talk to us about the LGBT community.
Yeah. These days, I find myself thinking a lot about homophobia and transphobia as traumatic experiences. There are ways that persons kind of nullify how transphobia and homophobia affects a person, especially when it's not incredibly violent. So somebody might say, "Well, I see Saucy Power dancing on the avenue. Like, there's no problem with gay people." And they don't take into consideration how so very often the kind of endurance trauma that happens, the kind of vicarious trauma that happens. And so I might be a gay person living in Maraval. I don't live on the beatum, but somebody on the beatum gets severely beaten, or something seriously happens to somebody else. Those things affect me in a way that I become so terrified that I begin to feel like my space is limited in this country. And so, although everybody wouldn't be like, I'll leave West Moorings and go and live on the beatum, not necessarily that kind of crime limiting space, but more the limiting of space, even in spaces. So you are on work, but you know that because your co-workers know you're gay, that if somebody else is in the washroom, you can't go. You know that although we are out at the beach doing something everybody else does, you know that I can't get up and I don't know, saunter into the water the way that I feel most comfortably doing. And so in all those spaces that even you think should be a space where you could be yourself, you're so limiting, and space kind of closes in, and kind of processing that through from thinking about it like a child growing up. And what does that mean when they enter the world? So that so many LGBT persons hit their 20s and they automatically feel like second-class citizens, and in very many instances act like second-class citizens, because so much of their life is limited in so many different ways. And so if we can begin to appreciate homophobia and transphobia as traumatic experiences, we can then approach how we do therapy, one, but also as a social worker, how do we address like systemic issues around transphobia and homophobia.
Yes, it's very important to note that I like how you said it, that you all feel like sometimes you don't have space within a space. So working on creating that is also important. And as I have you here, Luke, we want to know, what are some signs that members of your population will display that, signify to you there's an issue with their mental health?
When I interact with persons, what I look for the most is that kind of closed-mindedness. An LGBT person existing in society, you automatically are open-minded because you exist in the periphery. So it's almost like you're always looking in on somebody else's movie. And so there's a way when you get into a space when you cannot appreciate that other people are different from you, those things really send off red flags to me. And so I kind of pay attention to that more. The other thing is that cutting and self-harm is so high. among especially trans persons, but it's so high among LGBT folk. And so even if somebody doesn't actually cut, there are several other ways that they engage in self-harm that you want to try and pay attention to. And that might be overeating, that might be starving yourself, that might be bulimia, it might be deliberately getting into horrible relationships because you think you're not worth it. And so it's almost like you punish yourselves in these relationships. There's this word that I learned. Is it masochistic emaciation? Something like that. But essentially, it's where you keep people around you in your circle who are cruel towards you, and you rationalize it by saying, well, no, my friends tell me the truth. And so I find that a lot with people who have these friendship relationships that may not even be romantic, with friends who really just are horrible to them. And it's like, that's not your friend. Like, you need to be more in control of that relationship. But there are ways that I know I said this before, but like we wear the trauma, and so we take it on, and it's not, oh, that's the other thing. Listen, I'm not entirely sure how straight people exist in the world, but you can see trauma in LGBT persons by the way they wear it. And so when they're walking on the street, how they walk, how they hold their head, whether or not they engage with persons, whether or not they can smile at somebody and nod and say good morning, whether even when there's a lot of space around, they sit down like this, all those kind of small things. So when persons come into trauma, when persons come into therapy, those are the kind of things I pay attention to kind of figure out what kind of questions do I ask, where do I go, and it also helps as well to pinpoint what age in their life the trauma might have occurred if it's a serious trauma. Because depending on how their body language is, you can tell, well, that seems a bit regressive. Let me ask you about primary school.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I mean, there are quite a lot of similarities in dealing with LGBT individuals and heterosexual individuals. But of course, as you said, there are the nuances. And these are important because these people come into our office, these people come into our spaces, and we have to know how to appropriately treat with everyone. So thank you for that. And Bertrand, what are some of the signs that you see in the males that send off red flags for you?
Well, I firstly want to say that everyone is different. Based on everything we've been sharing so far, there are different personality factors, there are different types of behavioral patterns. So it could vary from person to person across the board. But I would say for men, based on the research, we know that one of these signs, for example, with depression, a male who is depressed may not necessarily be crying or sad or weeping in a way that we might expect it to be. That may be more common with a female. Men with depression, the research and data shows that men may tend to be more angry. They may be angry in their relationships. They may be angry in speaking to people and strangers, and that's something to look out for as a sign, because quite often men haven't been taught to process emotions like sadness and grief. So then the mirror option, which we refer to primary emotions and secondary emotions, but what you might see is that anger might be hiding the real issue, which is sadness in depression and crying. The second thing I would really look out for with men, which is very common, is alcoholism and substance abuse. Very, very common. We see it. You drive through anywhere in Trinidad and Tobago, but not now, but in the past because of COVID. And you see people just drinking in the bar. And it's like, yo, I feel like going on a good fet right now and just drink away my problems. So like, bro, let me smoke something. And so even people in high stressful jobs, substance abuse and drugs, as a coping mechanism for men. Because again, that's a way to sort of not deal with your emotions. It's a coping strategy, a coping mechanism, as it were. And the last one I would share would just be noticeable changes in a man's mood, behavior, emotions, his energy, his appetite, his sleeping. Look out for those. Those are the telltale signs across the board in most types of mental health challenges. Those sorts of changes, if you know the person and you see it, that could be something that's up, and you should try to have a conversation just to check in with him.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad that you said, this is specifically about men and especially those in high stressful jobs, because that makes us jump over to Ronald in the law enforcement, which is very much male dominated. And of course, it's a highly stressful job. And from my understanding, they do also have quite a lot of what Bertrand spoke about in terms of the substance abuse, etc. So maybe Ronald, you can expound a little bit more on that for us. Thanks, Bertrand.
Right. Well, you're right. So there'll be a lot of overlap with the population that I'm familiar with compared to with what Bertrand was just describing, right? So one of the signs, or some of the major signs that we tend to see, would be similar things: substance abuse. Yes, so I would say alcohol in particular, right? And you find more of the acting out behaviors. So yes, you might have a lot of depression, but not in the most obvious way that we might want to think about it, as somebody who's always sad and tearful and that kind of thing, right? You see it more in the anger, right? You see it more in terms of that kind of flattened affect, the numbness, the lack of emotional expression, nothing really moving that emotional needle in one direction or the other, just that kind of numbness, right? Something like increased sick leave and that kind of thing. You find that that's also tends to go up. That's a red flag as well too, right? But the anger, the aggression, the numbness, those tend to be the telltale signs.
Thank you so much for that. And Kelly, when it comes to couples, what do you see?
Well, I guess in the case of couples, we'll be looking at, as opposed to mental illness, in terms of the health of the relationship, yeah? Well, one of the more obvious signs, or some of the more obvious signs, would be conflict. So there's an increase in conflict. You're more irritable. You're fighting a lot. Things that you wouldn't usually get upset for, you're getting upset for, or you're triggering your partner a lot more because part of you kind of just so aggravated and unhappy that you want to kind of upset them. So whatever the reason, an increase in conflict, avoiding being home or around each other, and becoming a little more disrespectful, saying whatever you feel like saying, not caring how it comes out, because at this point you're fed up and turned off. But then there are the less obvious signs, like loss of emotional connection, which could happen very gradually, loss of communication, or less communication, not communicating effectively, not really listening and hearing each other out. Your partner has expressed something to you, but you can't repeat if you were asked to, what is the actual issue that your partner is having? So it's kind of like the boiled frog syndrome, if you ever heard of it, where it's an idea that if you put a frog in tepid water and you turn the heat on, as the water gets hotter and hotter, the frog keeps thinking, I'm okay, until it gets too hot that he now can't jump out and he dies. So just just looking at some of the things that stifle the relationship very gradually, and you're thinking, oh well, it's just a mood, or it's just a phase, or you're not even thinking about it. But these sort of things have been happening, and you're not realizing it. And then that's why oftentimes, as I said, I get them when, wow, one day you wake up and it's like, what happened to my husband? What happened to my wife? What happened to my relationship, to my marriage? I've been focusing on the kids, so I didn't realize that we were losing connection, and now I can't find it back. So yeah, some of those.
I love that you contextualize that question in terms of the health of the relationship. I think that's amazing. And I'll not get that image of a boiled frog out of my mind now. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So, we all have all these populations that we treat with, and we have these are not new. We have all these populations throughout the world. But what about treating with these populations is unique within a Trinbagonian or a Caribbean context? And maybe Bertrand, you can start here.
I would say what's unique within the Trinidad and Tobago Caribbean context has a lot to do with avoiding dealing with issues in the first place. People really don't want to sit comfortably with the challenges. And a big part of it is about, don't worry about that culture. That's a small thing, brethren, and so we avoid a lot. And so it really calls for us as mental health professionals to go deeper and to be gentle in confronting, but still holding people accountable. I think within our context, of course, I spoke about substance abuse in terms of alcohol. That's a common thing. Something that I would say with the population, of course, is in particular males, young men, the sort of antisocial personality disorder type, where there's disregard for right or wrong, because we're seeing those types of increases. We're seeing persistent lying, we're seeing rebellion, disrespect, manipulation. Those are some tools that we see within our culture, and in some ways they're glorified in our music in the Caribbean. It's a bad man thing, you know? And the females also have a reference point as well to what is the ideology of the Caribbean woman based on how media and Jamaican music and even sometimes our local music portrays how a woman should be and how a man should be. And so I think within our Caribbean context, we're fighting some great battles because we're socializing our young people to respond to challenges and problems in a way that's more confrontational as opposed to let's really work this out. Because, you know, you're weak as a brethren if you have to sit down and talk about this. You know, you had a pop-up gun, you know what I mean? You had a, nah, don't take that, dog. And with the females, it's more like, you fight for it, you know, you come from a man, nah, you know? And we see that in the music and we see that in the culture. And in many ways, it's funny and it's entertaining, but we see it replicated in our high school system, you know? We see it happening in social contexts and environments, and we see it glorified in the music and how it's represented in music videos. And I think that's one of the things about our Caribbean culture and local culture that we want to look at, how we really address issues and treat conflict in ways that are more, you know, pacifying versus, of course, escalating.
Yeah, you do a really good train up person imitation there, and that was really nice.
You know, we just do it, you know what I mean?
But it's true.
We all grew up with that chain of culture, so we know in the Caribbean, you don't stay with it. You had to represent yourself.
It's very true because, and you're right, it is that chain up culture is a culture of escalation. Who is the person that says, no, this is not what you should do? Don't pop that gun. Don't fight with that young lady. No one does that. So it really is a culture of escalation. So thanks for that. Luke, what do you think is unique to your population here in Trinbago and or within the Caribbean context?
I find a few things. One is that there are some schisms between what is authentic gay culture and what isn't, because culture is not what we discuss in Trinidad, but what we see on television. Of Western gay culture kind of does to our society, and sometimes makes us a little. I don't want to use I want to use schizo in the most funny way possible. The other thing is that Indian and African culture also clash a lot in the gay culture, because Indo culture is a lot loose with sexuality, and within African culture it's very, very policed, and so that influences a lot of the engagements that happens. So I used to have a dreadlocks, and when I had a dreadlocks, people thought that I was the most macho, that I, you know, like sex was going to be the best thing with me. So as soon as you walk into the club, like people were lining up behind you. So those kind of experiences, that's really cute. But those kinds of experiences that are very unique to Trinidad. You find that even like things like in St. Michael's, when Indian boys come into St. Michael's, the African boys kind of treat them as sex objects, and it's almost like a feminization of the race that happens there. And so those kind of things I find happen in Trinidad and Tobago. The other thing that I realize is that gay culture in Trinidad and Tobago is very much Caribbean culture, because there's so many Jamaicans, Guyanese, persons from Grenada, and they're like about 4 countries where a lot of persons migrate from those countries, either for economic reasons or because homophobia is so tough there, and Trinidad is seen as a haven. And so it is very difficult for me to like go to a party or to have any kind of engagement with LGBT folk and not meet other Caribbean people. Like it's such a normal thing to me. I've never even thought about it. And to have, you know, very deep, meaningful relationships with people who are in Jamaica who have only met online, but you think of it in a different way, you know? And so that is one of I think that's a good thing though. I don't think it's a bad thing, but it's one of the things that I've seen that makes Trinidad gay culture a little different. Tobago gay culture, now that is non-existent. Do not go to Tobago and be gay. Well, no, I will clarify that. You can go to Tobago and be gay, but you can't be a Tobagonian who is gay. If you're a Tobagonian who is gay, you need to come to Trinidad. And so when you try to engage in gay culture in Tobago, you realize because it's smaller and everybody knows everybody's business, that people are a lot more closeted and you have a lot more experiences of persons who might say that they might be gay for pay or something, you know? So it's not necessarily a gay culture, but it's more like it's tourist culture. And then you take your vacation, you come to Trinidad, you party, you line with your friends, and you go back home.
Thank you so much for that, Luke. I think it was really interesting to see how you share the difference between the islands, the culture between the two islands, Trinidad and Tobago, and then of course between two of the major ethnicities, which would be the Afro-Trinidadians and the Indo-Trinidadians. That's something I never considered. So thank you for that. Ronald. No, yeah.
Yes. So some research was done on the TTPS, right? And it used an instrument called the police stress questionnaire, and that was split. That's actually split into two separate macro categories: operational stress relating to the execution of the job, so like going on raids, arresting people, dealing with the court system, that kind of thing. And organizational stressors, so things that are unique to the organization and how they may impact your life. So like more administrative stuff, time away from your family, etc., etc. Right? And I guess surprisingly, it was more the organizational challenges, the organizational stressors. You know, like feeling supported by your seniors, having a lot of paperwork, the time and opportunity to eat proper meals, those kind of things that we might not even think of as being in the hierarchy of what would be on a police officer's mind. It was surprising to see that some of those things might be more of a challenge. But when you actually get into it and how things function, you go into to law enforcement expecting to engage in particular types of challenges that are not typical to the human experience, and you get trained for dealing with those. Actually being in it and being trained for it are separate, but to some degree you're prepped for engaging in those types of things. But because potentially you don't give too much thought to, this is still a large group of people with their own dynamics individually and as a group, and we're going to interact, and other people have their own agendas that might not be particularly aligned with mine. Those type of things that you might find in any organization that you don't think of as being a focus in law enforcement, actually those end up being some of the most stressful things for people in those types of professions. You know, so you might be engaging with somebody who was just involved in a shooting or something that might be extremely traumatic for me, and their main focus was, after I went through all of that, this man really want me to sit down for an hour and fill out all these papers, John. Because the message that they're getting from that is, I did this to either protect my life, your life, or somebody else's life who already don't care that much about me and want to point out all the things that I could have done better in the heat of the moment that they never experienced. And while I try to come down off of that, you think so little of me, or that's how the processing going. You think so little of me that my sleep, my recovery, all those kind of things, not as important as literally checking all of these boxes that going to take me about an hour to do. You know, just the message that could signal to somebody in those circumstances actually goes a much longer way, oftentimes, in the stress levels than the actual incident in and of itself. So I guess much like with abuse, sexual abuse, all those kind of things, a lot of what goes into how somebody processes it and overcomes and that kind of thing is on the personal support is much the same in those contexts.
Thanks so much for that, Ronald. I think definitely that may explain to a large extent why a lot of our officers kind of treat with the public even the way that they do, because it's, you know, a repercussion of how your superior is treating with you after you just saved a life, you know, or something of that nature, and then you have like a mountain of paperwork to do. I probably would not be the most personable person either if it were me. So I thank you for that. And Kelly, tell us about the couples.
All right. In the Trinidad context, I mean, I think something that's somewhat unique, I mean, across, let's say across similar cultures, is that we're very collectivist. The level of involvement that your parents, your grandparents, your auntie and your uncle, the siblings, even your friends have in your relationship is really interesting. And not only the involvement they have, but the involvement that sometimes we let them have. And this is sometimes the driving force for the breakdown of a relationship, especially as we change over the generations and so on. Some of these things become less okay, right? So you find that the decisions that people make about their relationships, about who they get involved with, if they get married, when they get married, when they have kids, if they have kids, what they do if they get pregnant, a lot of these things in the background, what's helping with decisions is the influence of other people. So one thing that I talk about a lot and I work with a lot is boundaries. And I find that a lot of times too, what I see is a lot of kind of loose boundaries and people struggle to set boundaries. I mean, based on, so for instance, one time I was having a conversation and we were talking about child abuse and keeping your children safe from other people and teaching children that it's okay to say no, they don't feel like giving a hug to auntie or uncle. And what I was asked is, what if your uncle will feel bad? What about how you will explain that to uncle? And I'm saying, uncle has to understand your most important job is to protect and take care of your child. You're not saying anything about uncle, but you're teaching your child how to take care of themselves. So we have to know that it's okay to focus on what is important. You're not being rude, you're not being mean, but boundaries are so important to a relationship and the amount of involvement. And then of course the influence of culture and religion, what a husband is supposed to be like, a wife is supposed to be like, what the lifestyle or what marriage means, how much integration into each other is normal and appropriate after you've been married. And again, so even in allowing culture and religion to form those things, it's also influenced by, again, parents and people who put these things, these expectations on us. And then it's up to individuals now to decide, well, okay, I'm going to live in accordance to what is expected, what would make everybody else happy. And then I lose myself. So sometimes it's not even the partner. It's me who has, because I have decided to take on, what the religion said, what the family said, what the friends would think, that I didn't stop to think about what I wanted, and my partner is perfect, but that's not what I want, right? So in a nutshell, some of those things would be unique to us.
Thank you, Kelly. I think boundaries is one of my favorite words.
Mine too.
I also say it a lot with my clients. Boundaries are important. And that thing you spoke about where, well, uncle will feel bad if you tell, the child, don't hug them if they're not comfortable, or, give me a kiss, give auntie a kiss. Those are things that can lead very easily down a slippery slope. So boundaries are important. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And I'm going to ask Ronald to start us off. We're almost to the end, and I want to link our last two questions. In which direction, or would you like to see mental health move in Trinidad and Tobago? And what advice do you have for any budding mental health professionals?
Okay. The one of the directions I would like to see mental health go into is being integrated into schools as a priority, you know, and in the professional world, you know, I come to have a profit motive, an efficiency motive, that kind of thing. So to see mental health services reframed as essential to having the best outcomes possible for your team, for your business, for your bottom line over the long haul, you know, because once we have a framework like that, it will be better seen for what it is, one of the most important aspects of the human experience, right? Which you can't divorce from all those other things that you may want or that you claim to want, right? Another another direction that I would like to see mental health move towards. I don't know if this might be controversial or not, but in terms of some kind of regulation, some kind of licensure. So I'll give an example. I was invited to a workshop once, and didn't really get too much information about the speaker. And somebody actually paid for me to go, and was really excited about that and that kind of thing. So I was feeling kind of bad to say no, so I went. And towards the end of this conference, talking to the speaker who's supposed to be well versed and experienced and that kind of thing, the person's background was in marketing and had an MBA in like international business or some kind of thing like that, right? So I would like to see some of those things not happen so much, you know. But on the flip side of it, so getting into the second part of the question, advice that I have for younger mental health professionals. I don't consider myself to be that old either, you know. But as you go along, there is a very crucial place for the skills, the theory, the techniques, those kind of things. But never ever lose sight of the fact that the most fundamental element is that human connection. Right? You could have all the facts and the figures and the processes and all those kind of things, but you're a human being trying to enter into the world of another human being. And for me, that's an exceptionally humbling process. Right? Keeping sight of that, keeping track of that, you know, and going along the way in my journey, sometimes I would have struggled with, you know, I don't really feel like I adding any value to this person's life, to this person's experience. I didn't really get to do anything as such. And then for a little while down the road, from those same people you hear, that was the best thing that I believe you could have done for me at that point in time. You didn't realize what you were doing because it didn't feel technical enough, you know? And you know, you see this, you probably see the pie charts in probably one of your first classes. The smallest slice of the pie is the theory and the technique, and the largest part of the pie is the human connection. You know, so I would say to upcoming professionals, all of those layers that you add on top don't mean much if the foundation is not based in a genuine interest to learn, to understand, to connect with the human being sitting across from you.
Thanks so much, Ronald. I mean, we really cannot overvalue or underestimate the importance of the human connection. So thanks a lot for that. And with regards to licensure, I think social work is pretty ahead of the game when it comes to that. And psychologists, we're coming up in the ranks. We are coming up. We are very much doing the work to get licensure happening for us. So things are happening slowly but surely. So thanks again for sharing. Luke, what direction would you like to see mental health head in TNT? And what advice would you have for budding mental health professionals?
Yeah. I want to be very cautious about that. I mean, although my master's in clinical social work, I really don't think like I am that good in therapy as maybe a psychotherapist or something. So I would kind of be shy about giving advice. But I would say that the next 10 years, I'm completely dedicated to content creation. And those are all kinds of ways that we can have content creation. So sometimes it might be academic content, it might be a piece of research or a journal article, or sometimes it might be more commercial content. So we've created these videos that we upload to YouTube, but it's all about exploring what is happening indigenously in the LGBT culture in Trinidad, and then putting that out there as content for people to consume. It helps me as a counselor because the more I interact, the more I learn. And when you do the research, you're able to get it's just multiplied kind of awareness that you're able to kind of take in all at once and be able to really analyze it well in order to do delivery well, but also creating content so it's out there. So any random person, if you just came out of UE and was like, what do I do about this trans woman who is in my office, that at the top of the Google searches is some Trinidadian piece of research that's going to come up before something else.
Thank you so much, Luke. I completely agree. Indigenous content creation. I love it. And I'm looking forward to reading your journal article. Bertrand, thank you.
All right. Well, firstly, what would I like to see more of? Firstly, I'd like to see TTAP continue to do the great work that you all are doing. This is a really helpful conversation. I tend to get messages after these conversations, and people are really moved in some way. And as I listen to everyone speaking, I could see that all of you resonate with people in big ways. So I want to say, firstly, congratulations to the mental health people who do such pioneering, stressful work. So congrats to everyone who's listening, who's in mental health, and even the panelists. The next thing I would say is, of course, the decentralization of services, simply meaning that you don't have to go all the way to Port of Spain if you need a mental health service. You don't have to go all the way, somewhere far away or drive. It really needs to be in some of our youth centers or health centers as an addendum. I would love to see that. The next thing I would like to see, of course, I mentioned it before, more forums for women, for men, for couples, for gay people, for everyone, for people in the police, more forums where they could just come together and have conversations in a relaxed manner, just to feel safe, just happening nationally. Those things are so therapeutic and powerful. Even I, as a facilitator, was really touched and inspired at the end of many of those forums. So I'd love to see more of those types of efforts. Of course, I would like to see, more awareness about the services that are available virtually and online. So for example, today, Childline, big up yourself, Childline, is launching their app. And the app really is one that allows for chat time. So now our children can go and chat, not just make the call, and the Childline number is 131, but you can download the app and chat. You could go to their website. They have not 24 hour, but they have 24-hour call access, but they have chat access as well online, where you can talk to someone. And of course, the Childline number is 131. I would love to see people knowing these numbers. 131, the Children Authority, 996, call and make a report and get guidance. Childline allows you to just chat with anyone, even if it's a bedtime story for advice on a child or mental health, Families in Action, Lifeline, Ministry of Social Development, and of course the Ministry of Health that has a directory online with other services. I love to hear, people knowing, which I refer to them as the 7 I always refer to, and just having conversations with them so that if something is triggered in someone, they would know where to go. And finally, the advice that I would give for anyone entering the field is be passionate. Don't stop, bruh. Don't stop. Kings and queens. We have to be fighters, because I really feel like mental health is the taboo thing. But it's changing gradually. I think we could, even a conversation like this virtually is changing. It's getting a different factor. But I believe that we have to fight. And I believe that the true way we could fight this, and Kelly knows it because I've called on her, is through volunteerism. For anyone who is listening now, and you're young, starting your bachelor's or your master's, or you're wondering, I want to do a course here. Or you feel like, what we could do to shift the system. If you're in a management level, we need to do more volunteering. So Kelly knows I call her Kelly, come to the volunteer center, do some, stuff with us now. And I'll be calling on her again. And then I know Ronald, Luke, and Julie, I'm definitely going to be calling on you all. Because I believe that volunteerism is what's necessary in our nation and any civil society to proceed and grow. People putting themselves aside and just giving time freely, that's the only way we'll reach people. People cannot afford therapy sessions, most of the population, especially during the pandemic. And so if we can volunteer our time in some small way, just some forum or some conversation, even if you're starting and you're not doing your bachelor's, if you could help with, managing this webinar or just managing some data. Childline needs volunteers. I know Kind TT needs volunteers. All these organizations need different levels of volunteers. If you could always volunteer at least, 1 month, at least once a month, you would be taking mental health forward in Trinidad and Tobago. That's my my big beg, you know what I mean? So thanks.
It was a huge beg.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
Thanks for that so much, Bertrand, and perhaps you can send me a list of those organizations who require volunteers, because we have people requesting, sending us requests all the time. Do you have any opportunities for volunteerism? And we don't know.
Nice.
So if you share it with us, we'll be able to do that. One of the reasons we wanted to do this particular discussion was because we wanted to show that that mental health is a collaborative effort. It's not just about the psychologists. It's not just about social workers. It's not just about psychiatrists. It's all of us doing our best to ensure that mental health gets to where it needs to be. So thank you very much. I agree with decentralization of services. I am from Ludbury. Lord knows coming up to Port of Spain is a task. So yes, good job. I'm part of the big beg for that. Yes. So thank you so much, Bertrand. And yes, we will be passionate. And but last but not least, my predecessor, Kelly.
Yes. Well, first of all, big up to Bertrand and all the plugs and resources. Every time he speaks, he has all of these resources. And to answer the question, both questions, Ronald triggered a couple of thoughts for me. So I'll just kind of, they would match a little bit. First of all, yes, there's a committee setting up licensure. So Ronald, have no fear. It's going to happen. I also want to endorse that point about mental health, teaching about mental health starting in school, in primary school even, helping children understand what it is, why it's important, what it looks like, what it feels like, what you can do if, and all of these things. I think it does need to start from school. So I would also be an advocate for that. And other than that, I'd really just like to see more of what I've been seeing lately. For World Mental Health Day, I saw so many people posting about mental health. And I mean, not psychologists, not people who work in this field, just people just hashtagging and sharing information, even for suicide awareness. And I was pleasantly surprised. And yes, I was surprised, but pleasantly so. And I really appreciated that. And that made me feel so happy. So as Bertrand was saying, we're moving away from that taboo and that stigma, and especially the younger generations are much more embracing of the importance of mental health and understanding of what it actually is. In terms of advice for younger mental health professionals coming up, I would say get a mentor. It's what has always worked for me ever since undergrad. I would identify somebody whose career I admired or who is doing something that I want to do, let's say in the university, and I would just ask, would you be my mentor? I remember when I first started asking that, I wasn't too sure what it would entail, and then the professors would be like, okay, what does that entail? And I didn't know, but it worked. And I got so much guidance and advice and personal interest, and I still have those relationships with those people, even though they're in different countries. Another thing is join TTAP, even as a student, because you meet other mental health professionals who are seasoned at different levels in the field, and just being in the events, volunteering, being around, you will learn so much about the field. And what I find is that a lot of people who are studying psychology, they are really seeking guidance as to what do I do to get what I want. And a lot of times it's not until after people have completed the degree that they're lamenting that they say I can't work with this bachelor's. What am I supposed to do now? I want to counsel, and I want to, and they're really upset about that. So I would say, get that type of information and that type of research early on, so that you enroll in the correct programs for what you want to do. You take the right path academically, so that you will be on the right track professionally. And on that note, my last point would be, don't try to practice independently without adequate guidance, supervision, and experience. So you can private practice if you like early on, but you must have a supervisor. You must get those sessions, because and Ronald spoke to it, getting that, being involved in a whole other person's entire life and being, you could really do a lot more harm than good without even knowing. And what I found is that a lot of people that I see were turned off of psychology or therapy for so many years and suffering as a result because of bad experiences that they had. And I don't want that to happen, so you don't know what you don't know. So never think. And even for people who have been practicing for years, there's still things that we don't know, that we learn. We have experiences that are surprising to us. We constantly do research, we constantly do courses, programs to keep up. So it's always, you have to be open to constantly learning. Be open to that. This field is not, you're not sitting down and liming, you're not at the bar. That's not therapy. Therapy is very, very, very specific, and it's very hard work for both the therapist and the individual. We actually work, this is work, right? So those would be my 10 cents. JL, you're muted.
My laptop is doing the most. I apologize. Thank you so much for your nuggets, Kelly. We really appreciate it. I want to endorse everything that you said, especially join TTAP.
Yes.
Right. TTAP is not just for psychologists, it's also for affiliated field professionals, right? So social work, it's for the students, come and join us, see what we have to offer. And then there are things that we're trying to do like this where we can make it available to the public. So you want to learn more about mental health. As Kelly said, it's becoming more and more destigmatized, and the taboo is going away slowly but surely. We have a lot of work to do. So the more hands on deck we have, the better. So thanks, Kelly. And I think Ronald had one more thing he wanted to say before we close.
Just from the discussion that we had, something came to mind that I saw just yesterday. There's a documentary out now called the Social Dilemma. Right? I don't know if anybody saw it yet, but it was extremely eye-opening for me. Our social media experience, our online experience, our smartphone experience is being so tailored to keep us in silos, to keep us only talking to people who agree with us almost 100%. And in doing that, it makes our society, our own opinions more and more polarized, because we don't get the benefits of interacting with people who are not exactly like us, to help us to learn and to grow and to see that the differences might not be as extreme, or we have much more overlap than we have differences. And the consequences of not doing that cost people their lives in some instances, right? So I just wanted to reinforce, keep having conversations. Don't allow large groups of people who are other to just be a stereotype or a caricature in your head, right? Have that interconnectedness, have that discussion to learn from other people and for other people to learn from you, right? We can only grow by doing that, and we can't grow if we don't do that. So I just wanted to make a plug, we need to keep having conversations, having dialogues, having debates, so things don't go in another direction, right? So we could grow in a more healthy, holistic way together as a society.
Thanks so much, Ronald. And again, a big, huge, heartfelt thank you on behalf of the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists, or TTAP, to our guests today. Again, Ms. Kelly McFarlane, clinical and organizational psychologist, Mr. Ronald Auguste, counseling psychologist, Mr. Luke Sinette, lead social worker, and Mr. Bertrand Moses, psychotherapist. Thank you for engaging in the conversation on mental health and society. I hope that you all will join us next time, as we will actually be speaking with creative arts therapists, right? And discussing mental health from that perspective. So thank you so much, and see you next time.